Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed chairman didn't put an X on his date today on his calendar, so he is in Bartlesville. So I get to wield this thing today. And October 9th, Aeronautics Commission meeting, we are now in session. And we are in compliance with the Open Meeting Act, and the meeting notice has been filed and the agenda has been posted. So we are called to order, and Jane, would you record the members present for the last time?
Vice Chair Amos.
Here.
Secretary Putnam.
Here.
Commissioner Hunter.
Here.
Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Ritz.
Here.
Commissioner Conway.
Here.
All right, thank you. I need a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 4 is retirement presentation, which we're going to do reluctantly. Victor?
Yes, ditto on that, Commissioner. I guess I should say, Mr. Chairman, ex officio today, and getting ready for another term. This will be your 6th term as chair.
Feels like it, yeah.
Long as serving, I mean, you've served longer than I think all of our governors combined. Oh, just kidding.
Yeah.
Well, it is unfortunately kind of a sad note, this particular item. Jane is retiring. Of course, that happens, I think, for everyone at some point. Retire and you start a new chapter, so that's definitely what Jane is planning on. Jane's been with us for 11 years. She's had numerous positions. She originally came to Aeronautics as an assistant operations officer / executive assistant to me. Spent a few years doing that, got me somewhat organized. That's pretty much impossible. And then she became grants administrator and my executive assistant. And then we had that little misadventure escapade of $3 million was taken out of our revolving fund in 2014, and she became full-time grants administrator. We realized we really needed to work with our sponsors to make sure that we got drawdowns done, grants closed, and she certainly put in place the foundation for effective and efficient grants administration, which Michelle has taken to new heights and is now full-time grants administrator, kind of following in that same path. And again, leaving me as an as my executive assistant. That seems to be a tale that happens often. And finally, when we were pretty quickly, Jane's predecessor had an opportunity and left us pretty quickly, and we were a little bit of a lurch. And once again, Jane came to somewhat, you might say, the rescue. And she has served as chief operations officer, I think, for the last probably 4 years, 3 to 4 years. So she's had in 11 years, she's had quite a distinguished career at the Aeronautics Commission. And a point I didn't mention, but certainly one not to be overlooked, the fact that I think she survived 3 or 4 moves. And right in the middle of those, and our moves were never quite easy. Someday we'd only get on one move, we only got like 5 days notice from the governor that you got to move out of the First National Building. It was somewhat of a mandatory evacuation, I think. So there's certainly been some adventures. But we were able, there's been a citation prepared for Jane by her respective legislators. It's not particularly long, like one of my speeches, so I'd like to read that if I could, with your pleasure. Citation for Jane Mitchell. Whereas Jane Mitchell, serving 11 years of exceptional commitment to the Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission, is being honored at a retirement reception on October 9th at the Oklahoma Department of Transportation in Oklahoma City. And whereas Jane Mitchell knew nothing about aeronautics other than she loved to fly when she began working for the Aeronautics Commission in 2008, She worked as the executive assistant to the director, secretary to the commission, and received her certified procurement officer certificate from the state of Oklahoma in October of 2009. And whereas Jane Mitchell took on additional duties as the grants administrator for the commission in October of 2012 and was promoted to the chief operations officer in August of 2015. And whereas the Oklahoma legislature does hereby take great pleasure in recognizing Jane Mitchell for her hard work, sacrifice, and accomplishments, and knows she will enjoy her retirement as she spends time with her family, including her 4 grandchildren. Is that all of them?
There's one more coming.
And one on the way, and friends, serving at her church, and getting to do more sewing and crafting. And now therefore, pursuant to the motion of Senator Lonnie Paxton and Representative Brad Bowles, the Oklahoma legislature wishes to congratulate Jane Mitchell and directs this citation be presented. So, and we have one other token of our esteem for Jane and respect from the agency, from all of us. A special commemorative, we think this is very nice. Dale kind of wishes we'd gotten this for him. He's wondering, well, where was this when I retired? So Dale, you're lucky. I wanted to get you the acrylic. We got you the real deal. So this is a really nice clock, guaranteed to work, and if it doesn't, Ben, you'll be going over there as our engineer and figuring it out. In celebration of 11 years of meritorious service, Jane Mitchell, Oklahoma Aeronautics Commission.
Very nice.
So,
Very nice.
would you like to say some things, make some comments? Keep them nice now.
Nice.
I just want to thank all of you for the opportunity to get to work for the state and to work with all of you. I've gotten to know most all of you fairly well and have really enjoyed working with all of you. And as far as you, Director Byrd, you have pushed me to new heights that I didn't realize I was capable of doing. And yes, I've had 3 positions and have enjoyed every one of them. I would almost get to the point I could get there and make it totally good, and you'd say, oh no, you're gonna do this now. So I don't feel like I've achieved that perfection, but it's doing things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise thought I was capable of. So you saw something I didn't see, and I appreciate you for that. And as far as the rest of the staff, we have several new ones, but there's several that have been here for a long time, and you guys have been like a family to me, and I've really appreciated that. And even though we've had a lot of changes lately, our group has been very good to come together and get things done that needed to be done for the agency, and I really appreciate you for that. As far as the people from the state of Oklahoma, I appreciate the opportunity to serve in this capacity for the 11 years I have, and I'm looking forward to this new chapter in my life and a lot of little ones running around. That's my thing, and a new one coming in December, so I just thank you a lot.
Jane did not pay a lot of attention to the seamstress aspect of her various positions. I can tell you that there were a number of wardrobe equipment malfunctions. I'm trying to think of because this lives forever and it's on tape somewhere right now. Fortunately, those never became really serious equipment malfunctions. Mine were always, like, hey, Jane, the button's gone. I can't go address, I hate to ask you to do this, but yeah, immediately. There were some more serious ones, but they were all, total disaster was averted because Jane was, always had that handy. So in addition to her expert baking, I don't know who's going to, no one has thought of me in that regard. I think, Michelle, you may be it may be bequeathed to you possibly, but, all right, so, thank you, Jane.
Great.
Now Mr. Chair.
Yep, item 5, sir.
So, unfortunately, Jane's departure does suggest some things, and Michelle's as well, really, moving to full-time grants administrator. 2 recent new hires for the Aeronautics Commission. You have been provided their resumes. First, Andrea Post, who is my new executive assistant. And Chris Wadsworth, who will, now he feels like, God, you didn't tell me it was going to be this way. Do I have to do, repair wardrobes and things like that? Probably not, Chris. We'll probably let you off the hook. But Chris will become the new Jane, if you will, so to speak, the financial and office manager for the agency. I would, if either of you would like to make some remarks, certainly now's the time to say anything you'd like. Keep it, of course, clean and civil.
I would just say I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay.
I would say the
Ditto?
same, grateful to serve.
She hasn't quite, the jury's a little bit out because she works for me directly, so we understand that. I'm sure that Jane and Michelle both understand that, so yes. And I'm sure probably some of you do as well.
Item 6.
I am, this should be up on the screen. So a lot of activities since our last regular meeting, if you will, in July. Then we had the special meeting in August dedicated to aviation and aerospace education primarily. Some of you, I think I saw some of you were at Tinker and the Primes, and at that event was the ACES Advisory Forum. Tinker and the Primes had record, we have Stan Grawl with us today from Rose State, and he could certainly, Rose State really, I think, is what you might say is the organizer and coordinator of that event for the Midwest City Chamber. But if Stan will correct me, I know, but I think it had record registrants, I think right at 1,000, right there, close? A little bit more, and about over 800 attended. Yes. So those were record numbers. Tinker and the Prime seems to be getting better and better, and I think the word's getting out. There was an ACES advisory forum open to, haven't seen Don Whitcomb, so Arlesia. But that was on the afternoon of the last day, I believe, of Tinker and the Primes. As I understand it, I was unable to attend that event, but Grayson and Sandra were there, very well attended. And the director of ACES, Don Whitcomb, General Don Whitcomb, who some of you know, was quite complimentary of Aeronautics, and we very much appreciate that. We're there by statute, their primary partner in the implementation of ACES, and most of you know that ACES is basically a continuation of OAI, the Oklahoma Aerospace Institute, which Stan will remember, and CADSCU, the Center for Aerospace and Defense Supplier Quality, two programs that were in aeronautics for about 8 years that were originally created in OCAS, came to aeronautics, and now they're at Commerce under a new flag, new banner, ACES, which was actually a creation of Sandra's Aerospace Commerce Economic Services Act. We like the ACES acronym. The TBIP luncheon on August 19th was Congressman Cole. It's always very good that he gives you the frank assessment of what's going on the Hill, what might be possible. Talked a lot about the Defense Authorization Act in the House, and it was always good to see him and his staff. Metrotech, and this is why Stan is here, just in case I mess it up, but there's been a new partnership formed between Metrotech and Rose State College. And it's the AXP Aerospace Expansion Program, which will allow those that are in A&P programs to actually get college credit too. And if I understand it, Stan, I think that this will expedite their ability to obtain an associate degree in the aerospace field. And this also opens up partnerships with our higher research, our research universities, Oklahoma University and Oklahoma State University as well. Stan, would you like to add anything to that? I think you would. That's why I gave you the opportunity. And I do have some, Stan was kind enough to bring us some pamphlets, so I'm going to give those to you all, and then I'll put them on the front desk in case anyone in the audience would like one of these. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrd and Mr. Chair and commissioners and friends. Greetings from Dr. Webb, our president at Rose State College. Dr. Webb is really trying to meet the governor's goals of becoming a top 10 state. And of course, we're all biased, and even though we give a lot of credit to oil and gas, we know aerospace is #1 in Oklahoma. And so we're trying to bring the educational opportunities all together to make it easier, foster and promote, and make it easier for students who have a desire for aviation or aerospace to take a certain path. And they can start with Metro Tech, get their A&P, their FAA certification, and then get college credit as well. And if they choose to go further, they can go to Southeastern for their program, OU or OSU. And for that matter, they can even go get their graduate level degree at OU for their MBA program. So Dr. Webb and the staff is pleased to be part of that. And if it wasn't for you all with your vision and this young man right here, persistence, I'm not for sure Rose State would be in the position we're in today.
You have forever endeared yourself in my heart by calling me young,
Oh,
so
okay.
thank you. No one does that these days, including my wife. Most of you are familiar with Project Lead the Way. That is one of the premier programs. We've been in Project Lead the Way for years. There was somewhat of a commemorative lunch on the 21st, which I attended, and talked about new things they're doing with respect to STEM education. Commissioner Ritz, always involved in the Norman Chamber of Commerce Aviation Breakfast. Very fortunate this year to have Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, as the keynote speaker. He is a really good speaker. Loved hearing his, and loved visiting with him, his comments about we are not behind. Yes, China might have landed on the dark side of the moon. Maybe Pink Floyd will sing about them. We've landed on Mars 8 times. So we're not behind. We're going to be, once again, just like in the early 1960s when we were behind the Soviet Union, but we caught up rather quickly and surpassed them with the challenge to land on the moon and return safely in the decade of the 1960s, the only nation to ever do that. We'll be doing something like that again, I have no doubt, with Administrator Bridenstine's leadership at NASA in the near future, probably within the next 10 years. The Oklahoma Leadership Oklahoma Fall Forum, I'm going to come back to that. I want to cover these other real quickly. The Oklahoma Aerospace Forum, it is something that is somewhat of not a replacement for the Oklahoma Aerospace Summit, which some of you are familiar with, that we had every year for probably about 7 or 8 years. It was in Oklahoma City, and then it was probably 2 or 3 times in Tulsa. But it is, you take this, you take Tinker and the Primes, those things together certainly put a spotlight on aerospace, and Leadership Oklahoma helped that as well this year. But that forum is coming together rather well. There are still seats. The first one was last year. Administrator Bridenstine was the speaker last year, the keynote speaker. This year, the keynote speaker I'm very proud of, have arranged that General Tom Stafford will come and speak at that. He is going to make the same presentation to that forum that he's making to the National Academy of Engineering here in the next several weeks, the history of the Apollo program. Seems apropos given this is the 50-year anniversary of the Apollo program landing on the moon with Apollo 11. And no one can talk about that better than General Stafford. So he will be the keynote speaker. There are a number of good panels. Lieutenant Governor Pinnell will be leading a panel on branding. So if you have any interest, please talk to me. We can hook you up with the coordinators, the organizers of that forum, and I'm certain that you would be very welcome there.
Where's it going to be?
It will be at the Cox Convention Center. Yeah. Last year, but it kind of outgrew, but it's not going to be at the Cox. The NBAA, really, really proud of this. I think I've prodded somewhat my friends at the ACES program and at the Department of Commerce, Brent Kissling, and they're supportive. We haven't been there about 4 years, and if we're as big, and it's the second largest industry in our state, and we're at things like Paris Air Show, we're at things like MRO Americas, AUVSI, Oshkosh, EAA Air Venture. This is the largest aviation trade show under a roof in North America. You know, it's usually attended by between 25 and 30,000 people. There's only 2 convention arenas that actually can host it. That's Las Vegas and Orlando. They're the only ones big enough. We need to be there. We need to be there with the Oklahoma flag planted and saying we're open for business and we're about aviation and aerospace. So we are going back. We have a number of partners. We'll have a 20 by 20 booth. We're going to have a breakfast reception on Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. So if any of you are there, please come by our booth. And you'd say, what's the number, Vic? I'll get you the number. It's in the North Hall. It's in, I think, 631. But really, really happy about this. Proud. We've got a number of good partners, cities, companies, airports, and really looking forward to going back to NBAA in this manner and being there with an exhibit booth, raising our flag. Leadership Oklahoma, we have our co-organizer, co-host, co-coordinator, Commissioner Ritz. She was very instrumental in bringing this about. They have forums. I think they have a fall forum, spring forum. I don't know if that, but certainly those two. Their forum this year, they chose to put the focus and spotlight on aerospace and aviation. And I think certainly our economic impact study prompted that, the second largest industry in the state. We need to know a little more about it. So we spent a whole day really for Leadership Oklahoma alumni, Leadership Oklahoma current class, and I think it was open to the public as well, if I'm correct about that, Commissioner Ritz. And then the morning was a tour of Will Rogers World Airport. I think that was rather well attended, and people commented, gosh, I just didn't know, one of those kind of things. And then the afternoon was a series of panels, sessions, dedicated to aerospace and aviation, educating those there in attendance about aerospace and aviation. Grayson made a presentation on our economic impact with Don Whitcomb and Brent Kissling. The Executive Director of Commerce was the moderator of that session. And then myself and Mike Carolina, the Executive Director of OCAST, had a presentation on the flight path forward. Where do we go from here? How do we make this the #1 industry? How do we, at the very least, ensure its viability? And this presented an opportunity for me, not just for a long speech. In fact, I had to shrink it. I think Commissioner Ritz was proud of me, maybe. But that I could just maybe, hey, here's the VIC plan, how we grow our aerospace industry and ensure its viability. But actually, I didn't do that. I looked back. I'm one of those, if we're going to do studies, if we're going to pay for a study particularly, we ought to be using those studies and not just put them on a shelf and forget about them. We have done 5 studies on growing the aerospace industry and ensuring its viability since 2003. 5 different studies. Numerous recommendations. I went back and read every one of them and read all the recommendations and highlighted the ones that we either didn't implement at all or barely touched. And I actually didn't put down all of them because then my presentation would have been at least 45 minutes and Mike Carolina would not ever forgive me. And neither would the audience either, since we were just between them and happy hour. But what it said to me was, here's our flight path right here. We need to be, these were smart people in the aviation aerospace industry. Indeed, for one study, we paid $100,000. That was the strategic plan to grow Oklahoma's aerospace industry that we did actually in 2009, 2010 under the leadership of former Secretary of Commerce Natalie Shirley. Many good recommendations. Recommendations we need to look at again and decide which ones of these do we want to try to do through really, we have the form, we have the vehicle, and it's ACES, just like OAI was supposed to be. Which one of these can we accomplish without any legislation whatsoever? Which of these do we need to put aside and actually requires us to try to engage in some advocating for those particular aviation policies. So I'm going to be doing that after NBAA, going to get together and meet with Don Whitcomb, with Leisha Pearson, and probably Brent Kissling a little bit too, to talk about those recommendations. Which ones do we want to try to actually do? Which ones do we want to, let's put them on the, but keep them on our radar, and we'll do those eventually. It's really kind of exciting to get, I've urged them for years that we shouldn't be forgetting these. These are actually good recommendations. So I appreciate Leadership Oklahoma for forcing me to do that re-examination. The last time I really took a hard look at them was when Governor Fallin came into office. So thanks for the opportunity, and I think we have some really good ideas for the way forward. That concludes my report. Happy to entertain any questions. I would say one more thing about the Leadership Oklahoma and the recommendations, of course, at the forefront of all those, workforce. Because if you don't, thank you, Rose State, thank you, Metro Tech. Anything we can do about workforce, all the other recommendations are for naught. They're meaningless unless we take care of the lifeblood, like of any industry, workforce. Questions?
Vic, where is NBA being held?
Las Vegas. This year's Las Vegas, next year it'll be Orlando.
Any other questions? Item 7, Vic, Naseo Conference.
Conference was in St. Paul, so we welcome in a new and the first ever chairman, John Bender, first ever chairman from Alaska, John Bender, is now the chair of Naseo. It started on, it's arguable, it started on Saturday of business meetings, the legislative committee meeting, which I co-chair with my colleague from Alabama, John Egerton, and actually went through Wednesday at noon, dealing with a number of business issues, a number of good technical sessions, states talking about best practices, which things we confront and challenges we have to deal with as well, and also heard from our friends at the FAA. So a very good meeting actually in St. Paul, Minneapolis. Actually, it was St. Paul, so somebody can get us for an Open Meeting Act violation, I guess. But I would ask also for your consideration and approval of our annual membership dues of $11,500.
Move approval.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Call the roll.
Vice Chair Amos,
Aye.
Secretary Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz,
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Vic, item 8.
As I think the commission knows, this is something we was actually put in statute during the 2017 session. The first one ever was December 2018. I think that was attended by about 125 people at the Atlantic Aviation Hangar at Wiley Post. The last 2019, 2018, 20, I may have these off a little bit, maybe 28, it was in Tulsa, where it was attended by 400 people. It has become definitely a success story. And this year we're having it at the AAR hangar in the kind of the more vintage looking hangar at Will Rogers, and getting help from the Oklahoma City Airport Authority, appreciate that, and Karen Carney, and from AAR, of course, a lot of help from AAR, and our friends at the Garrity chapter. So we're partnering with them this year. We've done it in the past with the Oklahoma Airport Operators Association. This year we're doing it with the Air Force Association Garrity chapter. So I would ask for our supporting partnership, as we usually do, if I could ask for your consideration and approval of a $1,000 partnership.
I move for approval.
Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Amos,
Aye.
Secretary Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter,
Aye.
Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz,
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Vic, we need the legislative update, please.
This is coming into the 2020 session. Wow. A lot of sessions. The first thing and outstanding thing is Senate Bill 470. That was the bill that was introduced last year to repeal the cap on our largest source of revenue, the aircraft excise tax. The cap is currently $4.5 million. There was no such cap until the FY 2016 year. It went into effect on November 1, 2015. But it has affected us. It's taken about $1.5 million from what would have gone into the OAC revolving fund and put it in the general fund. For us, that can do some projects. I could actually do a small runway extension. Could certainly do some type of pavement project, significant pavement project, lighting project. It's still a meaningful amount of money on the airport and airways side. It may not be too meaningful on the surface, roads, highways, bridges side, but it's very meaningful on our side. And that it violates the implicit agreement between the state and aircraft owners that what you pay in this regard, and your registration fees as well, and your aviation fuel tax, is going to be utilized based upon what we are authorized to spend our money on. It's going to go back into aviation infrastructure across the state. We need to remove the cap. It doesn't need to be spent on other things that ought to be funded by the general fund. I don't doubt the validity of those at all, but they shouldn't be funded by aviation taxes and fees. So we will continue to press that, and we need it. As you've heard many times from me, our 20-year needs forecast is $1.8 billion in needs in the Oklahoma airport system, and we'll have $1 billion in revenues to address those needs. So we have a severe shortfall, and I don't think we can just sit by and do nothing and depend upon the federal government. Hopefully
If our
things.
5%, if we take that money and apply that to federal projects, 5%, that represents $60 million worth of federal projects.
Okay, where's your, you might borrow your microphone, just, okay, because I don't think the audience heard you.
Okay.
It should be on.
Yeah, there we
Looks
go.
like it's on. Okay. So that'll be that is our number one highest priority legislative initiative. There is also, the Oklahoma Airport Operators Association has been talking about, we made an effort for the aviation fuel tax to increase that several years ago. That definitely met some roadblocks. You still use a lot of political capital, and it wasn't going to be very significant. A need for and a legitimate request for a general appropriation. We're probably one of the lowest, we're right at the bottom, lowest states insofar as investment by the state in its airport system. We're on average doing about $4 to $4.5 million a year. Our neighbor in Arkansas does $14 million. Missouri does 10. Kansas does more now, and it used to be behind us. Believe it or not, Kansas. I know you think Kansas, it is known for aviation. New Mexico was behind us, now more. Colorado does anywhere from $20 to $30 million a year based upon its aviation fuel tax, and they have a big hub there called Denver. So we're at the low end. Texas does about $40 million a year, and that's totally basically a general appropriation and actually some highway funds that go to the airport system as well. We need to get it up. I think the airport operators may be advocating for and presenting a request for I've heard different figures, 10 million, 5 million. That's something we would certainly want to support that. I'll definitely have to visit with Secretary Gatz about that. We have already. There has been some recent signs that, oil and gas, and then we have something happens, Saudi Arabia oil fields, whatever, that causes a blip in Oklahoma's revenue picture. Revenues could be flat. Already something coming up that revenues are going to be flat. And if revenues are flat, generally appropriated agencies that depend upon that, they're going to be flat. So we were looking forward. I think a lot of people were looking forward. Oh, well, we're going to have FY21, and budgeting for that's going to be good. Well, it could be tight again. So we'll definitely have to monitor that closely, and I think that will certainly dictate our direction in that regard. Unmanned aircraft systems, many of you have talked to me about. You see what's going on in other states. Believe me, we're aware of that as well. Also aware of the fact that at one time Oklahoma was definitely a leader when we became the Homeland Security Test Site, the only Homeland Security Test Site. Then we did not become one of the FAA test sites. Very thankful for the fact that the Choctaw Nation is part of the integrated pilot program, one of those 9 test sites. The state we did not put in a proposal. We did not put an application for that. So very thankful to the Choctaw Nation. Kind of shows something, that maybe we're falling a little bit behind. So talk to Secretary Gatz about this. This is something that we might want to. North Carolina is certainly a leader in this regard. North Dakota is a leader. Kansas, Virginia, there's a number of states that are doing some really good things with respect to unmanned policy and regulatory activity that actually is encouraging that burgeoning industry. So we want to look at some things like that. We're studying things right now, and I will probably be coming back to you certainly in that regard. The last thing I'd mention, the Incentive Evaluation Commission, which was formed by the legislature like 5 years ago to look at all state incentives, review them. This was kind of a creature of former Representative David Dank. Some of you, he was my representative, a really astute fella that really wanted to look at, believed in good tax incentives, but also believed that bad tax incentives needed to be done away with. And there were too many of those in the state of Oklahoma. So that's been the work of that commission for the last like 4 years. Our good friend Lyle Rogo, the head of Duncan Economic Development Authority, has been the chair of that commission, along with Carlos Johnson, a friend of ours, as the vice chair. I've appeared a number of times and commented on incentives for the aerospace industry. They have a number of those under review right now. There may be, because of some of their recommendations, certainly some legislative activity with respect to a number of those tax incentives. The engineer tax credits, it's been unequivocally recommended by that commission to continue. Its payoff is like, I don't know, 20, 30-fold what it has cost the state. We're now looking at about 20 to 25 million in cost. That's an estimate, and probably somewhere between 1.5 billion and 2 billion in economic impact. That's one of those examples of a really good tax incentive that certainly has contributed in a major way to companies like Boeing moving 2,500 people here and Northrop Grumman moving several hundred people here. And that's why we did those. Other than the main issue being addressed was we needed engineering talent in our aerospace industry. So that is no action needed, just a matter of information. Any questions, commissioners? Okay.
Item 10.
Item 10, this should be, I believe you've received the auditor and inspector report in your packet. We believe Jane met with the auditor's office a number of times. Myself, Jane, Grayson met with them on at least 2 occasions. Maybe I and Jane were involved on 3 occasions. Talked to them about their findings. I believe certainly that you'll see the findings and recommendations. Those began on page 4 of the report. This is, of course, a public document. It was an operational audit. We believe that our recommendations, they won't exactly tell you, like give you an A because of their independence concern, which I certainly respect that. But in our discussions with them, I certainly am led to believe that our recommendations will resolve these issues, which were not significant issues, but we believe they will take care of the auditor's concerns expressed in the report. So I would certainly, I or Jane would entertain any questions. She's smarter than me, of course, on this report.
Item 11.
Okay?
Jane?
Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks, Victor.
Good morning again.
Your last time at the microphone, Jane.
It is. In your packet behind item tab 11, you will find financial information, and it's all as of September 30th. The commission had an ending cash balance of just over $5 million, with encumbrances totaling 4.7, leaving an unencumbered balance of $240,337. The estimated revenues for the remainder of FY 2020 total just over $5.2 million. The remaining estimated expenditures for the airport construction program for FY 20 could total as much as $6.8 million of projects that are ready to go. And provided the funds are available, they could go ahead and proceed with them. Our total expenditures for FY 20 is just over $1.6 million, which is about the same as the previous year. Our statutory revenues deposited for the month of July totaled $793,359. The August deposits totaled $151,166. And September deposits totaled $874,355. The statutory Revenues deposited for the first quarter of the fiscal year totals $1,815,880, which compares to $453,524 for the same time last year. So we like this year's numbers a lot better than last year's. And then on the third page, you see the average comparisons between the revenue, which is received, the statutory revenue, which comes from the aircraft registration fees, excise tax, and the fuel tax collections. We had a budget request due by October 1st, which is the report. They basically ask for information about the governing body of the agency and programs that we have and the cost of those and expected anticipated costs in the future. And so that report was submitted by October 1st. So I guess that's all I have for you, unless you have any questions for me.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Grayson, you're up with item 15, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Airport construction
Right,
program.
sorry.
Oh, yeah, item
12,
12?
yeah.
Okay.
You were trying to move us along.
Trying to move us along, Commissioner. I will do my best. 12A, we've got 3 projects before you today. 12A is a project that was in the approved ACP for Antlers Municipal Airport. This is a runway extension of about 500 feet. Gets them to just under about 4,000 foot total length. Total project cost, a little over $430,000. Obviously, it's a 95.5 proposition. Be about $408,000 from OAC and about $21,000 from the sponsor for matching. I will tell you that the reason this project is so cheap, I'm sure some of you see that runway extensions are multi-million-dollar projects. One, it's a small runway, so it's only 60 foot wide. It doesn't have a parallel taxiway. But two, we have a very strong airport board. I don't know if it's chair or if it's just somebody on the board that is in the earth moving business, and they have agreed to do all the dirt work and the prep work for this runway extension at their cost. And then all we're doing basically is paving on top of that and putting lights in. So very forward thinking from this airport sponsor. I do know that that individual, that company, I think has a desire to buy a bigger airplane, and that's the reason they're wanting this extension. I do know there's also a doctor, there's a bank in town, as well as an attorney that would fly into this airport if they had a longer runway, because all of those individuals either have larger aircraft that need the larger runway or would be buying larger airplanes once that runway is completed. So I think we may have somebody here from the city of Antlers. Joel, you want to say anything?
Thank you for considering this. This extension has been in the works for several years. We have the unique opportunity to extend this, as Grayson said, with one of the local contractors doing all the dirt work for us for free. And so if you are willing to fund this project where we can get the overlay done, we've also got an FAA grant for new lighting to go with this. So we would appreciate your consideration.
That was Joel Taylor, city manager for the city of Antlers. I'll stand for any questions. Staff recommends approval.
I move for approval.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Amos,
Aye.
Secretary Putnam,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter, Commissioner Ray,
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz,
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Item B
Item B.
is a project that's also in the Commission's approved ACP for the Lawton Fort Sill Regional Airport. They have a big terminal project going on down there. Came to us several years ago, requested our assistance with our terminal program. Obviously, we can't do the standard 50-50 $1 million, 500,000. That might bankrupt us if we went 50-50 on 16 million. But the overall project cost is about $16.5 million. It's going to be in a 2-phase project. Michelle, if you would move there we go. So you can see there on the picture, the green is phase 1, the red is phase 2.
Phase one, I believe we have bids on right now and are looking for a grant application from the sponsor. Phase two, I think, is going to happen here sometime next calendar year. We are looking to do, as we always do, 50%, 50-50 proposition with the sponsor's share. So the sponsor puts in $400,000, we're putting in $400,000. Obviously, the sponsor here is putting in north of $3 million on the total project cost, so we will not have the 50-50 proposition, but we will definitely get to our $500,000 allotment. I think the first phase is about $4.5 million. Some of that's going to be FAA discretionary money. A lot of it's going to be entitlement monies, and the airport sponsor has secured a loan to bankroll the project because, again, they are on a shoestring budget being an independent airport authority. And so they'll get this loan, and they will be able to pay back the loan with future primary entitlements. That's about the $1 million a year that they get. So a good lion's share of that, this is going to soak up the airport's entitlement funding stream for the foreseeable future. I believe we have the airport director here from Lawton, if she wants to say a few things.
She comes from Lawton, she gets to talk.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Barbara McNally. I'm the Airport Director for Lawton Fort Sill Regional Airport. We appreciate your consideration for participating in this project. It's a huge undertaking for us. In the 34 years that I've worked for the Airport Authority, this is the largest project that we've launched into. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Barbara, I'd like to, can you tell us, I think your traffic count is up at Lawton Fort Sill.
We have, well, operations are up. We have a lot of military traffic that moves through touch and goes from Shepherd Air Force Base. And of course, we have commercial service at our airport. We have American Airlines with 4 flights a day right now. And our employments continue to be up because we support Fort Sill. And that's sort of the built-in customers, so.
It's fairly critical to Fort Sill. In fact, your airport's been a factor in BRAC type issues, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and we are also the aerial port of embarkation for Fort Sill. So we deploy troops with very large aircraft that they bring in, charter aircraft. We also move all the equipment out when they move into real-world situations, C-17s and C-5s. So we are definitely partnered with Fort Sill. So yes, we think our airport is pretty important.
We do too.
Thank you. Anything I can,
The phase one is in green.
pardon me?
This is for phase one.
Yes, sir.
Diagram in green.
Phase one is the baggage claim area, temporary hold room. When we demolition in the next phase, the hold room area, the secured area, and the meter greeter area to the front of the baggage claim area, which right now is just roll-up kind of garage door situation. So this will be a flat conveyor, just like the rest of the airports have.
Any other questions? Need a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Gotta have some humor with it.
Call the roll, Jane?
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Great. Item C.
Item C, Commissioners, is a project identified in the Commission's approved ACP for the Max Westheimer Airport in Norman. This is a project to reconstruct the parallel taxiway system for runway 1836. As you can see there, this is quite an extensive project for this airport in south side of Oklahoma City. The airport has gone through, and this project has been a bit of a roller coaster, as we all have discussed in the past with discretionary money. It comes in at the last minute. Usually in the federal fiscal year, we had, okay, we have this amount of discretionary money available. Well, that's only going to fund the base bid, so we're only going to get to do the base bid. Then there were some discussions about, well, maybe that discretionary money won't be available at all. And then a couple of days later, well, we'll be able to do discretionary for both the base bid and all the alternates and get everything funded. So a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but we're glad to take any discretionary money from any state that might be turning it away. And Oklahoma got a couple extra $1 million on this project, so very, very thankful of that. This is just one phase of a multi-phase project. The rest of the parallel taxiway systems for their crosswind will be done in future years. So this is phase one, obviously their primary runway and of primary concern to everybody. Total project cost a little over $5.6 million. Again, this is the 90% FAA, 5% OAC, and 5% airport that we typically do on these big rock federal projects that involve multiple sources of federal funding. Staff recommends approval, but I do believe we have a gentleman here who might want to say a few things from the airport.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Lance Lampkin. I'm the Airport Administrator for Max Westheimer Airport. Grayson's right. This was some highs and lows for us. This happened all over one weekend. So I started Friday, at the beginning of the weekend, feeling very down about what was going to happen, and started Monday very happy. So we were thankful to get the federal dollars from discretionary funds from the FAA, and we really need it. We did a study on all of our taxiway systems about 2.5 years ago now, and found out most of our taxiways have a 0 life remaining. Go back, look at our records. Last time we touched them to any major degree was over 25 years ago. So this project is really needs to be completed, and we appreciate your consideration. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions?
Thank you.
Need a motion?
Yep.
I move for approval.
Second.
Call the roll.
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Commissioners, back on that item, I was a little afraid Lance might mention something or hit me on his way by, but a little brief bit of information. We're glad to know that one of his people that work for him, sitting in the audience here, has accepted a position with the Aeronautics Commission, and we are stealing one from Westheimer. So we apologize, Lance, for that.
I promise not to vote against.
And we're hoping maybe this little grant will be a little token to ease your hardship and ease your pain. But Nick, if you want to stand up real quick. Nick's going to be the replacement for Jen, who, as you know, left us at the end of July to go back to nursing school. So glad to have Nick on board, and here in about a little over a week from today. So be another new staff member joining the Aeronautics Commission. Glad to have him.
Welcome. Item 13.
Item 13, Wind Energy Development Act Emergency Rules. Commissioners, this will be in the front tab, front piece of paper there. The draft rules, which had been sent to you previously, just give you a little background history. I know we've discussed it many times over the last 3 years. The Aeronautics Commission's involvement in the wind energy and military training airspace issues across the state. As you know, this has been a long time, a long fought battle, and it's believe we've come to some very good resolutions and good conclusions. As you know, House Bill 2118 was passed with the emergency on it this past legislative session, and that required and amended some of the things that had been done in the 2018 session to require wind energy before they are able to build a wind turbine as part of a wind energy facility here in the state of Oklahoma. They have to get, from the practical perspective, a thumbs up from the DoD clearinghouse as well as from the FAA before construction can begin. And that's very vital to the success of our military across the state and all those military entities that use airspace in Oklahoma. Because the bill had the emergency on it, and we felt it was necessary that we needed to do emergency rules. Part of what was in 2118 gave responsibilities to the Aeronautics Commission to receive some of this data from wind energy companies, us as well as the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. Corporation Commission finished up their emergency rules a little over a month ago. And today before you, we have our draft emergency rules requesting your approval so that we can submit this on to the governor's office for his approval as well. Yesterday we had a public hearing to discuss these rules, see if we had any public comments. We did not have any written comments made during our comment period. We did have about 6 or 7 entities that attended our public hearing yesterday, some from WIND. I had a gentleman from the Airport Operators Association, had Jones PR in the room. Didn't have any negative comments. Everybody seemed to be in agreement with the rules, very appreciative of what we've done and understand the way forward. Just to go over the rules briefly, not go word for word. Subchapter 1 is just the general description. These are new rules for the Aeronautics Commission, unlike the Corporation Commission that already had rules governing wind energy when they were just amending those rules with this is actually new emergency rules since we haven't had rules dealing with wind energy at the Aeronautics Commission. So it's Chapter 40. Subchapter 1, general provisions, just definitions and discussing why we have these rules. Subchapter 3 is the notification of intent to build a wind energy facility. Anytime somebody's going to build a wind energy facility in the state of Oklahoma, they have to notify us with submitting 7460-1 information that they have submitted to FAA. Have to do that within 30 days for each individual turbine or each individual structure that would require a 7460 within that wind energy facility. Same goes for resubmittals. So if they've had to change the locations or heights of any of those turbines within that facility, they have to resubmit that new 7460 that they've submitted to FAA back to us. And we would prefer, as we always do in this day and age, we prefer to have those 7460-1s submitted to us electronically. That way we can keep track of it. We have actually set up a specific email, windenergy@oac.ok.gov, so that people can submit. We've been advertising this to the wind energy companies and the Advanced Power Alliance and anybody else out there, and we've already gotten several that have submitted and complied with the law, since it did have the emergency clause on it, comply with the law by submitting to this new website, and hopefully anybody else in the audience or any of you all can share that word as well about our email address. The subchapter 3-2, after they submitted the 7460-1, they have to submit, before they can begin construction of the actual wind turbine, they have to submit two things to us. They have to submit the determination of no hazard from the FAA for, again, each individual thing that would require a 7460-1. They also have to submit the military compatibility certification letter, which is a brainchild of the Department of Defense clearinghouse that basically is the Department of Defense thumbs up that everything's good to go and that there's no adverse impacts to the military. Again, I'll prefer those to be electronic communications sent to us through that email, that wind energy email that we described. Lastly, subchapter 5 is our requirements, our further requirements spelled out in House Bill 2118, and that is once we receive those initial 7460-1s from the wind energy company, we have to then submit that information to the Strategic Military Planning Commission, who we've been hand in glove with on this effort from day one, so that they can then send that to the bases and potentially comment to the clearinghouse if there are any concerns from the state level. And so that's the brief summary, high-level view of our rules, and they cover all the responsibilities that were given to us as part of what was passed in House Bill 2118. I'll stand for any questions or comments. Staff recommends approving these emergency rules.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just add one or two things to Grayson's comments. He's been the lead on this and certainly has, his hand is over the promulgation and development of these rules. And I know Commissioner Ritz certainly probably at the federal level, rulemaking and regulation making is a science. We do it pretty well at the state level. We don't nearly do as many as they do at the federal level and don't go through the elaborate process in the Federal Register and so forth. We have our own that's somewhat akin to that. But what these are basically about is implementing and interpreting the statutory amendments, the statutes that have been passed in this regard. Really, when you get right down to it, telling those that are going to be affected by the law how they comply. How do you practically comply? Which we think we've done that in a very straightforward, simplistic manner, and certainly allowed for an exception for those who for some reason cannot submit the required documents electronically. I'll say this, I think you all have lived this with us. Revising the Wind Energy Development Act was probably the hardest thing we've ever been involved in and accomplished legislatively in my 17 years of being a director. Probably harder than getting the engineer tax credits passed in 2008. The wind lobby is a very strong lobby on the other side. I will say that I will compliment wind in this last session for finally getting on board and working constructively to come up with a very balanced approach to ensure the protection of military aviation and civil aviation. That's what our whole interest in this has been, aviation safety, nothing else. We're not we're not interested in the tax policy issues, the tax incentives issue. That's for another forum. We also, we certainly are aware of, there is quite a landowner dispute. There's people on both sides of that, those that, hey, we're free to do with our land whatever we want. We can lease it to wind companies. We don't, it's our land. That's a God-given constitutional right. We hear that a lot, don't we? And then there are those who, well, yes, we have the right to do what we want to do with our land, and we want to utilize it for aviation. That is another issue that is out there. The legislature's attempted to address that before. We have not been directly involved in that, and probably it's something it does need to be addressed. It's something that is a policy issue for the legislature, and we certainly have stood in the shoes of providing technical advice to legislators. But we have, this issue was our issue. This was our goal. We felt like aviation, the safety of aviation was somewhat jeopardized, and certainly our military training airspace, which is just, it's got to be preserved by this state at all costs. It's critical to our military assets that are, after all, the biggest part of our aviation and aerospace industry, $19.3 billion. And they also do this other thing. They make sure that we have adequate global air power across the world to protect our national security.
One final thing I will tell you, the House Bill 2118 is being held up across the country as model legislation. There are some states that have already passed legislation, whether it's zoning or other protections for military airspace, but in terms of the complementing piece between ensuring FAA is heard and ensuring DOD is heard, this is being stood up across the country as kind of model legislation that states can adopt and need to adopt for the compatible development of wind turbines in military airspace. It's not about one or the other. It's about ensuring the balance, as Director Byrd was indicating, about the balance between the two industries and making sure they can both live together harmoniously.
The beauty about 2118, it did not come up with a new regulatory process and affix it on top of what was already there. It did take those advisory federal regulatory processes, which I know Commissioner Ritz is certainly familiar with Part 77. Commissioner Putnam, I know you certainly have become very familiar with the DOD clearinghouse. Those are advisory, really. Well, we made them mandatory here in the state of Oklahoma. Those processes that by and large, everyone who's going to do development really wants to comply with them in terms of risk, in terms of liability, and in terms of needed capital investment. You really do want to, but some haven't. And here in Oklahoma, you're gonna put that stick in the ground. You got to show that you've satisfactorily completed those processes.
Grayson, just a question about non-compliance, though. It's not in this document. Is there another agency that deals with non-compliance of the rules?
Yes, Corporation Commission has specific finding authority. So if there's not if any of the documentation's not submitted, there's specific finding authority in there. There's also in the statute specific, and I know the lawyer in the room will correct me if I'm wrong here, but specific injunctive relief if somebody did not do something in the appropriate manner and had started to build and had not complied with the law. There's specific injunctive relief for Aeronautics, Corporation Commission, and a couple other entities that are concerned about this issue.
That was my concern as well. We don't talk about that in these. We just say, to be approved, you do this. It doesn't go the other way.
Really, for us, I mean, I don't think a rule would be necessary that's pretty darn clear that we have the authority to seek injunctive relief if someone's not complying.
Okay.
So we can either, that's, TRO, preliminary injunction, permanent injunction. Even to the point of a mandatory type injunctive relief, if you put a stick up and you didn't comply with the statute, we can make you take it down.
Okay.
Were there any consequences for that company that kept going after our cease and desist letter last year?
I believe you're referring to Nextera and the Minco 4-5 wind farm. That was, of course, was the whole argument that somewhat precipitated the latest revisions to the Wind Energy Development Act. Those, over time, in negotiations with the Attorney General's office, they did stop putting up turbines. and that was worked out in probably not a perfect manner, but it has been, I believe, resolved and worked out and is concluded. And they won't be doing any more development in that particular wind farm.
How many did they put up while all that commotion was going on?
I'll defer to Grayson. I don't know if we have 70 to 90? Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I think the end total, I think it was 100 and, again, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was 175 turbines total, and DOD ended up objecting to about 75 of those. And so 100, I think, ended up being built, and then the 75 that had not been built were not further constructed based upon, I think, that agreement.
Okay. Any questions? Motion?
I move for approval of these wind energy rules.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Item 14, please.
Item 14, 14A, very similar to what we just did. We're going to, obviously, emergency rules are emergency, and they are good for a certain time period if approved by the governor's office, but we need to back those up with permanent rules. So this is just a request to move forward with the permanent rulemaking process for the wind energy and military requirements set forth from House Bill 2118.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Item B.
Item B, we're going to consider some changes to our administrative rules regarding the airport construction program. We did a very long and in-depth look at our grant agreement before Dale retired. Before Dale left the office, and his 20 years of experience in the airport grant world, he gave us some suggestions and some ideas on how we could revise the grant application to make it more harmonious and simplified for our grant applicants. And so some of those changes will require administrative rule tweaks, and that's what we're considering here is moving forward with some of those tweaks and suggestions. I don't think we can call them the Dale Williams administrative rules, but we'll know that he was the one that made his last mark on those rules. So again, staff request proceeding forward with the permanent rule process for the airport construction program.
Move approval.
Second.
Call the roll.
Vice Chair Amos.
Aye.
Secretary Putnam.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunter.
Aye.
Commissioner Ray.
Aye.
Commissioner Ritz.
Aye.
Commissioner Conway.
Aye.
Great.
Uh-oh. Battery change. Test, test. All right.
Okay, item 15, please, Grayson.
Item 15, Oshkosh recap, as we always have been doing for probably about the last 10 years, 12 years now, I think. Going to Oshkosh, Wisconsin for their annual EAA AirVenture show at the end of July. We had a lot of great partners there with us this year. I think we may have some pictures. Yes, so we'll have some pictures here flashing up on the screen. This was an interview that Brent Kissling and Vic Bird did. As we all know, the end-all, be-all goal for this trip is one, economic development and trying to showcase our communities and recruit companies to come to Oklahoma. Obviously, our second point is the Inhofe Luncheon, which we have on Saturday. All the Oklahomans get together. They're up at Oshkosh. We bring companies in that we're calling on and companies we're trying to recruit. We have a luncheon under the tent on the EAA grounds. This year, it's always grown a little bit every year. This year was our biggest year ever. We had a little north of 175 people, which got the tent about 3/4 full. So we are, might I say, 2 to 3 years away from filling up our tent and having probably a little bit more of an exclusive event and really controlling the audience. But it's always good to get there with Senator Inhofe and Jack Pelton from the EAA and hear about all the things that are challenging the GA world in ways that those things are trying to be solved. As you know, Inhofe usually announces his next pilot's bill, pilot's rights bill, It's no longer called Pilot's Bill of Rights 1 and 2 like those first two that passed, but there's always a new bill announced at EA Oshkosh, and so this year again there's an announcement about the new initiatives that his office is trying to get passed through Congress for the benefit of the GA populace. So it's a great event. Commissioner Putnam, I think you were up there at some
Yeah, I was
point in
up there
time.
for the week. I didn't
Okay.
make the luncheon, though.
Didn't make- so it was well attended, over 600,000 people throughout the week. I do know the first half of the week was a little busier. I think they changed a few things, and I know there was some headaches with that. But it was a great show. We only got rained out one day, and I think the latter part of the week it was pretty good. So again, great event, and look forward to seeing anybody that wants to be there next year.
Great, thank you. Item 16?
Item 16, going along with what Director Byrd said in his legislative item earlier, there's a lot of energy around the unmanned industry these days. It's really kind of become the latest and greatest. I won't call it as good as the space race was back in the 60s, but it is kind of re-energizing the industry and getting a lot of the young talent interested in a lot of those jobs that are dangerous, dull, or dirty that we couldn't have done, or it was unsafe to do them with manned aircraft. Unmanned aircraft are leading the way to achieve some of those tasks. We had two great events this summer. The UAS Safety Summit put on by the Oklahoma City Chamber here in the Oklahoma City area. That was a great event, getting kind of the law enforcement, first responder brethren together to discuss how law enforcement and first responders can utilize UAS in their day-to-day lives. That is probably one of the earliest adoptions of UAS in terms of really having a succinct and acceptable and a measured response to supporting an industry is the law enforcement first responders. We saw some great things from search and rescue to fire suppression and being able to figure out where fires need to be put out, the hot spots. Are there people in the buildings? When you look at infrared cameras, to anything from doing an overflight on a SWAT mission of somebody trying to go into a trailer area where there was potentially a hostage situation, and a drone being able to provide aerial coverage of that area and potentially seek out the suspect. And so there's a lot of good stuff at the UAS Safety Summit, and I think Director Byrd and I learned quite a bit on how can UAS be used for law enforcement, and we know it's continued to be expanded upon here in Oklahoma, and we expect it to continue. It will be in the future as more and more police departments and fire departments and other first responders and law enforcement agencies adopt UAS-type technologies, and as those rules and regs become a little looser to allow them to adopt those technologies within their departments. Before UAS, if you think about it, really the only departments that had aerial coverage of some kind were probably the Oklahoma City Police Department and the Tulsa Police Department, along with the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. So really only 3, maybe 4 law enforcement entities in the state that had that aerial coverage, and now that really could expand to just about any police department or law enforcement agency that could have that kind of aerial patrol or aerial coverage to help out their duties. The second conference we went to was more a little bit along the lines of the private industry. That was the UAS Tech Forum in Kansas. That was hosted by the Kansas-Oklahoma UAS Cluster Initiative, as we've partnered with before. Partnered with them up here, had a booth, sat right next to the ACES group. And again, this was all about how is private industry using drones to move forward, whether it's agriculture, precision agriculture, whether it's weather research. There was some law enforcement as well, but also just package delivery and all the other inspections and bridge inspections, cell phone tower inspections, so on and so forth, to go to how can these be used in various private industries and what are some of the challenges and ways of overcoming that. Not only one of the great things that the Tech Forum does is they kind of have an entrepreneurial session, a pitch session, so to speak, where new individuals or individuals that have brought about new technology or new suggestions to the UAS industry are pitching their technology or their ideas to the audience, of which there are several investors, entrepreneurial investors in the audience, trying to make those connections between the new technology and new ideas, and potentially funding some of those to make them be realized within the UAS industry. So both great events, and both highlighting that yes, the state of Oklahoma does need to have a UAS presence in the industry, and it is kind of the big up and coming. And as the regulations become more certain and the abilities of what UAS companies and individuals can do increase, the industry is just going to continue to flourish. So great things going on with UAS these days.
Just a quick note, Commissioners, on the Safety Summit, couldn't have done that without the very prominent role and assistance provided by the FAA, and particularly the Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center.
Great. Thanks.
Item 17, I believe, is next. That's the unclassified airports funding update. As you'll remember, probably about this time last year, we learned about an FAA bill that had just passed, 5-year FAA bill that gave unclassified airports, those are airports with less than 9 based aircraft, a chance at $300,000 of entitlement monies. And we brought forward to you a request in January, to go forward with an opportunity to act as agent for a good number of those unclassified airports, because again, these are airports that had not been receiving entitlement monies for at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 years. And a lot of the changeover in city leadership and airport leadership, they had never applied for an FAA grant. So we decided to step into the driver's seat and help out a lot of these small towns and communities. And yes, it was a big undertaking for us and staff, and we got through it. By the end of September, those that wanted grants had received grants from the FAA, and behind tab number 16, you will see a little description of all those airports. The first group, before the space, you'll see those are the ones, the 15 unclassifieds that we were the agent specifically for to help them out. Everybody but one accepted a grant offer, and you can see there the value of the grant, what the project scope was. I will tell you the one that did not accept a grant, there was a bit of a disagreement on the scope of the project, of what could or could not be allowed, and they wanted runway lights, and their pavement needed some assistance and needed some help, and so we could never get an agreement on board that, okay, we're going to move forward with accepting the funding for FAA, or accepting the FAA funding for airport pavement like it needed to be. And so at the end of the day, they did not accept that grant offer, and we've had several discussions with them and understand that they are not going to be eligible to receive any state money for that payment either. If we give up federal money that's available to an airport, there's no reason why the state should come and invest in the pavement in that airport as well. The group below the space there, you'll see those are projects that we weren't necessarily hand-holding. They were either us, so Carlton Landing, for example, or Fountainhead Lodge there in Eufaula. Obviously, those are our airports that we applied for grants for. Antlers and Clinton Sherman, they've been doing this for a while. They know how the process works, so we weren't acting as agent for those airports. And then there's 2 out there that did not make a grant application. Henrietta, never was able to make contact with them. They've always in the years past have never accepted FAA grant money, and so they never made an application. In Lake Texoma, we made a bit of a judgment call, as we've talked to you about in commission meetings past, that the pavement was kind of too far gone to invest in this $300,000, and that $300,000 really wasn't going to do much of anything for us. It'd be kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It really wasn't going to be a worthwhile investment. And so as much as we hated to see that money go, because this is money that can't be transferred to another airport, unfortunately that was statutorily written in the FAA reauthorization bill, we hated to see it go, but it was the wise investment for public resources and public dollars was not to spend that $300,000, to let it go and be turned back to Washington, D.C. So this was it was a monumental undertaking. It was a big effort, but at the end of the day, it was worthwhile. Our airports benefited from it, and more importantly, that kind of left a little bit of burden off OAC's shoulders, because those airports without this money are only looking to the state of Oklahoma to support their infrastructure funding.
A lot of time, it might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We hope not, but it could be. And we had to take advantage of this for these, is it 20 now or still 21, Grace?
It's 20.
20, because we don't have the funding to, in any way, shape, or form, do anything significant at these airports. All we can do is kind of patch. And that's been the proposition ever since they became unclassified in 2012. and became ineligible for federal funding. They used up their last, I think, in 2014 from their original entitlements. That's why we really emphasized with those that we're going to get this 300,000. You need to take it, and that's why so many of them, almost all of them, designated us as their agent, so that and we appreciated that, so we could make sure and take advantage of this offer from Congress. Very disappointed about the one that did not. And we just can't pass up federal money, and when we do, we have to remember that.
Next item, 18.
The DoD Military Airspace Project. You'll remember about this time last year, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, you authorized us to move forward with the DoD Airspace Mapping Project. This kind of goes hand in hand with the military training airspace, wind energy development issues that we've been talking about. In that DoD is wanting each state out there to have a portal that maps out all these areas of concern the military may have, whether that's low-level training routes, drop zones, radar-sensitive areas, traffic patterns, so on and so forth. They wanted to have a one-stop shop of where are these airspaces at, so that everybody, wind energy companies, the public, FAA, us, Strategic Military Planning Commission, any state entity, could go to this as a central hub of information. We received the grant from DoD, accepted the grant about 3 months ago, and as of right now, the RFP for this particular project is on the street. So we posted the RFP. I believe it closes at the end of this month, and we'll obviously go into the evaluation phase of all the proposals that we've received. And before we execute any kind of contract, we'll come back to you on the final cost of the project, and what that's going to look like, and who was the awardee for that particular project. And again, this is a zero financial cost to the commission kind of a proposition, in that the Strategic Military Planning Commission, it is a 90-10 proposition. The Strategic Military Planning Commission is coming up with a 10% match. We are simply the conduit, the project manager, the holder of the grant, so to speak, doing this in partnership with the Strategic Military Planning Commission. So moving forward on that, be happy to answer any questions.
Next item.
Last but not least for me is the Oklahoma Municipal League. We were up in Tulsa for OML's conference last month, and this is obviously our biggest constituent at the Aeronautics Commission, cities and towns across the state that have airports. It was a great conference, as it always is, lots of cities and towns and communities there. I gave a presentation about kind of the three pillars of what's important to aviation aerospace. That's the economic impact study. It's obviously the money that airports are always interested in, and then it's obviously the strings that come with that money, the obligations and the restrictions on what you can use the money on and what do you have to do after you get money from FAA and OAC. It was fairly well attended. I think we had probably about 40 people there during the presentation. A lot of people came up afterwards. It's one of those things, it's never fun to talk about the strings that come with money, but it is a very important part to talk about that, because it's not just a blank check that FAA or OAC is giving to airport sponsors. There are requirements and there is additional duties that come with getting that money. And so it's always good to remind airports that, hey, these are the necessary obligations that you're taking upon yourselves, and just we have to repeatedly pound it back into them 10 times to, hey, here are the requirements, here are the obligations that you are required to do with receiving those federal and state funds. So great conference. I'll stand for any questions.
No questions. Thank you,
Thank you,
Grayson.
Commissioners.
And item 20.
Mr. Chairman,
our events
in
coming
your
up.
packets, Commissioners, you should have a document that looks something like this, which Sandra usually puts in your packet, and that's our upcoming aviation and aerospace events. I would only add there's two that I've already talked to you about. The NBAA, October 22nd through 24th in Las Vegas, and the October 30th Aerospace Forum. And let me add this as well, that if you want information about the Aerospace Forum, which will be at the Cox Center, contact Andrea, and she can help you with that. If you wanted to sign up for that, how to do it, so forth, she can certainly help you. Questions about that at all? Okay.
Thank
Item
you, Victor.
21.
And, item 21.
Any concluding remarks about agenda items on this agenda?
Last questions? Okay.
Thank you, and when's our next meeting?
Next meeting, we need to discuss, commissioners. Right now, you'll see that it's actually on the calendar for November the 13th. We would suggest moving that simply because we moved this one because of our schedules in September that really dictated that we needed to move our September meeting. So now that we've had this one, we usually try to let a little more time go by so that we can bring to you all matters that need to be considered. I frankly think November 13th may be a little bit soon. I know that we can't get too late in November because of Thanksgiving. We could do November 20th, or we could actually move it to the first or second week of December. It's really your pleasure. And then, of course, really, the day we decided this year, back last December, to have our last meeting before December 15th, when you have to turn in your meeting notices to the Secretary of State, we decided to do it on Wednesday. Of course, in the past, we've done it on Thursday, so it's really, maybe pull out your calendars. What's good for you? I would suggest certainly no earlier than November the 20th, but I think also we could certainly look at December the 4th or December the 11th. Those are Wednesdays, and there are, again, we can consider other days as well. Wouldn't want to get too late in December, of course, because of Christmas and the holidays.
December 11th would work for me.
Yeah, I think me too. Trying to get mine to come up.
If we left it on the 13th, that'd mean a shorter meeting, wouldn't it, Victor?
It'd be very short, but I'd probably have to bring you back in December for a special meeting.
My vote's for the
Chairman,
13th.
Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, but did you hear what he said? Another. There's a trick.
Yeah.
Undo
Do we have a consensus? What, we got the 11th? 11?
Yeah.
11th of December?
11 December.
Okay, we will certainly try to have it right here. We'll take care of changes that need to be made with the Secretary of State. And we'll set it for Wednesday, December 11th at 10 a.m.
Sanders.
December, they have a vacation from December 2nd to
Well, that's the 11th.
10th. Right.
Yeah, so, okay.
It'll be a working vacation, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll have to get things with her squared away before she takes off.
Very good. Any new
Okay.
business?
Don't know of any myself. It's happened since we posted the agenda yesterday morning. I think it's adjournment.
That's it. On behalf of Chairman Potter, who's not here today, we're adjourned.
We will be having a reception for Jane out in the main foyer.